Get the Intel, the podcast meant for those of us trying to find out what the hell is going on in the field. Here, we discuss tools, techniques, and approaches that you can implement to streamline operations and let you focus on your craft.
All right, Chad Gill here. I am the host of the Get the Intel podcast, where I talk with leaders in contracting, management, and really anyone helping us do business better. This episode is brought to you by Laminin Coaching. Laminin is a business coaching with a focus on contractors in and around construction. We not only help with proposing solutions and methods, but implement them in your business. After all, good ideas are not useful unless they're implemented. So today, joining me is Kara Goldin. She is the founder and CEO of Hint Water, as I'm sure everybody knows now. And she is a professional executive who has been included on Fortune's most powerful women entrepreneurs list. And also, I was warned that I was supposed to do a very good job with this one, Kara, because my daughter said, "Hey, don't mess this up, Dad. This is the lady I want to be." So thank you for being here.
I love it. Well, thank you for having me.
Well, Vanna, so your story, the book is Undaunted, and your story is it's not this super smooth, trajectory. It looks that way on paper and stuff. But so starting out in school, you decided you want to learn something, and you just go and just ask questions and tackle it. I think that's amazing.
Well, it's I really knew that I wanted to do something that I enjoyed, that made a difference, right? I was a college student, probably not like, or I should say, like many others that are out there. I was a journalism major with a minor in finance, grew up in Arizona, in-state tuition at Arizona State. And when I decided that I really wanted to go into journalism in, the early 90s, all of the publications were based in New York. I had never been to New York City, but I was game, right? I wanted to get out there and see what would happen. And I think like that was probably where I kind of saw the most doubters around me. I never grew up in a family that my dad, I was an athlete. My dad always said, if you put your mind to something and you go and try something and you're really passionate about it, you can probably accomplish it, which is, great training to be able to go out and be an entrepreneur, right? That when I'm not accomplishing something, I start to think, okay, I really need to focus on something. And sorry about the dogs in the background screaming.
You're fine.
And so that was, kind of my mindset. And I figured, what's the worst that's going to happen if it doesn't work out, right? I won't be, I don't have a job at a magazine, which right now, so I might as well go for it and just go try. And so, that's what I did. But I think that is something that I encourage a lot of people. I speak on college campuses actually a lot, talking to people about it, because, when you actually think, oh, I can't do something, that's impossible. You have to have all the right, criteria. You have to know someone. That the reality is that if you're like that one person who sends a letter to the CEO or maybe went to a different school than everybody else who's applying at Fortune magazine, then somebody might just think it's sort of different and unique. I'm sure you interview people along the way and you're like, wait, how did you get here? Why do you want to do this? Right. And so I think, and you just need one person to bite right at that. And that was what I believed. And frankly, I think it's a big lesson learned.
Yeah. And kudos to your parents. I know you're the youngest of quite a few. I forget the number. I apologize.
5. Yeah.
5. And so they're like, so your youngest daughter rolls in and says, "Hey, I'm thinking about just flying all over the country and applying for these jobs." And they're like, "Okay, go." Your eldest sibling's bound to be like, "You would have never let me do that."
Well, I was paying for it. That's another thing.
That helps.
And I had waitressing money. I'd waitress through high school and through college. So, my dad had always, and my mom to some extent had always said that, if you're going to pay for something, then, we're probably not going to say no.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, including going to the mall and buying things that they thought was, probably not necessary. They're like, okay, well, she bought it. And that was sort of always the rule. So they were definitely aware that I was going to go and, do this in New York. I stayed with a friend of my sister's. Actually, I was just talking about the story the other day. It was down in, I don't know if you're familiar with New York, but St. Mark's Place. And, where frankly, Green Day was sort of like, has written much about that. I mean, it was really, that was probably one of the seediest areas of New York City, between St. Mark's, between B and C. And, it was truly like heroin capital of the world. And my sister's friend was living there in a fifth floor walk-up. And the first day that I, after getting a job, actually not at Fortune magazine, but at Time magazine, which was in the building, I walked down the fifth floor walk up to get to the subway. I had never been on a subway before. And there was an outline of a dead body. And my first day.
Yeah, it's like welcome.
Yeah, welcome to New York. And so I happened to ask the police officer, I said, so what happened? I was just like eyes wide open for the few days that I was there. And he said, well, somebody died last night. And I said, wow, like I've never seen, I was just sort of thinking out loud, I've never seen an out like this close. And then I continued to walk to the subway. And it was interesting because like a lot of friends said to me, well, why aren't you leaving? And I thought, how many more times am I going to see that? Right? Like it wasn't that I wanted to see that, but I thought that's just that will never happen again. And
potentially there's a vacancy in the building now. So, you never know.
Totally. I don't know what happened, whatever. Yeah. But it's interesting because I called my parents and I said, it was kind of crazy. The first thing my mom said, you should come home. Oh. And my dad said, that's New York. Right. I mean, they had their opinions and I just thought, okay, well, it didn't happen to me. And maybe that is New York and I've made a choice. And, my dad had always taught me to manage risk by figuring out, in order to get out of something, how much is it going to cost you? And he said, even if you never have to do that, it's a very good exercise to go through. So when I was getting cold feet on moving to New York, even, he, said, look, you've got a job. He said, you're going to get an apartment. Don't sign anything more than a year lease. Figure out how many, add up the number of months. If you have to break your lease, how much you're going to be out. You're not going to have any furniture because you don't have any money anyway. You'll have a mattress basically. And, you've got a one-way ticket back to Phoenix, and that's your risk. So, if you think that you've got enough in savings or you've got credit. I had a couple of credit cards and you're going to have to pay it off after time. But I mean, what's the worst that can happen? And it's still something that I think about today because I think, we oftentimes don't take these risks because we, present ourselves with lots of fears that we're not sure we can face, when the reality is that there's so many lessons learned if you actually go out and try something versus actually allowing yourself to be blocked.
Yeah, and I think there's comfort there. It's one of those things that I do a similar thing, and we try to teach it to people too. Is to say, if you're gonna do something, and you're trying to find it. The reality is almost never as bad as your imagined worst possible. So it's better off. Let's just say, honestly, what is the worst possible thing that could happen? And then, what would you do if that happened? Okay, great. And then now, what's the best possible outcome? And then somewhere in there is where you're going to land. And I think that people always get kind of concerned when they say, well, what's the worst possible outcome? It's not that you're looking for failure. You're just saying, let me put an edge to it so that my mind doesn't turn it into fire and brimstone. It's just a bad day or a bad week, or maybe it is a bad year. But
Yeah.
there's some definitive amount. And then you decide inside your body that you can tolerate that and it's worth it, or it's not.
Yeah. And I think, that applied even to starting a business. It's, it was interesting. Prior to starting Hint, I was in tech and supported entrepreneurs and was at America Online prior to starting Hint. And Steve Case, obviously, it's his company, and was there very early. Ended up growing a channel called Shopping, which is now sort of called Direct to Consumer. And there was no picture. I always think about it as a puzzle, and it ends up, when you look back on some of the things that you're most proud of, you didn't have the picture. You didn't exactly know how you were going to be able to accomplish all of it. But the most important thing was that you figured out how to get started. And it's going to be scary, right? And you have to, I think the best entrepreneurs know how to pivot and how to, get to a point where they're not getting traction in some way. And then, maybe slow down, never stop for very long, change directions to see if that's any better. All of those kind of things, I feel like I had a lot of experience supporting other entrepreneurs, kind of seeing that, but also growing up as an athlete, the same thing. I would go, I never even called other athletes mentors, but when I wasn't able, I was a gymnast and I was also a runner. And if I wasn't sort of able to achieve the things that I wanted to be able to achieve, I would spend hours watching people and I would ask them questions like, how are you running so much? Like, what are you doing in order to train? And, all these things that I think people kind of do, but if you actually focus on those things, there's a lot of stuff that is quite figure outable, right? And I think that is something that we have to make sure that we're not preventing ourselves from doing those activities, especially if we're feeling like we're not achieving what we want to be achieving.
Do you think a lot of people they decide what they want the endpoint to be and they envision that endpoint, and if they can't see where that part of it is going, like where you said that you were out, you were really looking to get a job with Fortune, and you end up at Time, but you don't see that as it's just you just pivot and say, okay, well that's what I'm going to do, and a lot of people are like, it's Fortune or bust, and so they never hit that. They never hit that step that it takes. They don't do what you're talking about, saying, well, this might get me where I want to go, or maybe I have to mold my endpoint to what I want it to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've been asked that before, and I feel like I always have a goal. But I almost put the goal on a shelf that is so high that I can see it, but I can't quite reach it. And I keep, putting that on a higher and higher shelf. So that's the other thing, that when I feel like I've achieved something, okay, now what are we going to do? Now what are we going to do? And so it is, the bar just keeps getting higher, but I'm excellent at sort of, doing that to myself, too. And I think like that's the thing that people really need to, think about. It's that, yes, you do need to have a goal, but you need to keep moving it. You need to keep moving, or think about it as the line moving forward or whatever it is. And I think, again, going back to athletics, I think that people who are fairly serious athletes, that's what you train to do, right? Or that you just want to just keep getting better. Um, and, I think it's even when you're operating a business, you're constantly trying to get better, innovate and do more. Because you've got to be able to take steps, especially when you're growing your business and scaling your business. That goal is going to change.
How important is it, or how do you manage the situation of celebrating your success and being, I guess, recognizing your success, and then at the same time maintaining your ambition? Like, how do you make sure that you're happy because of what you're doing and you're making those rides, but then at the same time maintaining ambition? You don't want to be this person who's accomplishing so many things, but you never celebrate any of it, that you're constantly miserable or feel like you're behind. I think that happens to people.
Mhm.
And then also to achieve a big goal and then just kind of, well, that other one will happen if it does.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why I left tech, it wasn't intentional, but I felt like I had kind of achieved what I wanted to, and I couldn't find a higher shelf. Right. I found myself being in a situation where I had built with a team, but from scratch, a $1 billion business for America Online. And so I wanted to also have time with my family. I had young kids at the time. I had two kids under the age of 3, and I was pregnant with my next one. So when I finally launched Hint, I had 4 kids under the age of 6,
Oh,
which was crazy. Not the time that anybody would have thought that I would, be launching a company. But more than anything, I just felt like the jobs, the roles that I was looking at in Silicon Valley, where I live in Marin County, but not too far from Silicon Valley, were kind of, the knockoffs of America Online. America Online is based in Virginia, and I felt like I was, being asked to sort of compete against myself, if that makes sense. And I think like that's the other thing too, that if you allow people to put you in a box, like I was a tech executive, and I never imagined myself to be a tech executive. I never imagined myself to be an entrepreneur either. More than anything, what drove me was curiosity. And so, to your point, I think that, you start somewhere, something that you're curious about, that you have an idea for, to actually go and solve a problem, which is how Hint came about. But I think that you have to enjoy what you're doing. And if you don't enjoy what you're doing as an entrepreneur, given, especially if you're a founder, then you shouldn't be doing it. I
yeah.
mean, right? Like it's crazy that there's a million other things. You can go support people. You can go, I always felt like if this didn't work out, I could go back into tech. I could do a lot of different things, but I think like that's the thing that I think people miss, that they think I can't do anything else because I've been in accounting forever. I can't do anything else because I've been in tech forever, whatever it is. And the reality is that you can do it, but you have to get out of your own way. And we don't get out of our own way because it's easier not to.
Right.
People are calling you because they've identified you as um, a great accounting person, a great tech person, whatever it is. But you have to actually define yourself differently for people, if that makes sense. Because otherwise, they're not going to build the puzzle for you. It's your job to build the puzzle for you.
They'll put you in whatever box they want to, and then you can decide to stay there or not. But
Right.
it's kind of like it's easy enough. So you weren't one of these who said, "Hey, at 8 I started my own lemonade stand, and at 10 I started this company." I mean, you were like, what is it that triggered, or did you always think you were going to own your own company, or was it just kind of one of those things where you're like, well, I guess I'm going to have to own my own company if I want to do this?
It's interesting. I I call my dad a frustrated entrepreneur because he had started a brand within a large company called Healthy Choice. And he started that inside of Armor Food Company, and they were acquired by ConAgra. And so in many ways, I saw, my first acquisition when I was growing up as well. But I think I loved the idea of creating. And my dad was super creative. I didn't learn until much later. I used to, really push on my dad that he was chicken, that he wouldn't go out on his own to go and start something. I grew to appreciate the fact that he really wanted to make sure that we had a roof over our head. He had 5 kids. He had a responsibility. He never threw that in our face, that's why he wasn't doing what he really wanted to be doing. And he felt like athletics, which are frankly quite expensive, especially when you have 5 kids who were, in athletics. I mean, he felt like athletics were a major, major part of growing up. It was like the one thing, it was like a non-starter we had to always be in he didn't care what kind of athletics we were in, but he was like, you have to find something to do. And so it was, it was interesting to sort of like live in that kind of house where, you were constantly kind of seeing the creativity, but I didn't kind of equate that to an entrepreneur sort of role. The one thing I'll say, I have 5 kids, but my brother is 15 years older than me, and my sister's 16 years older than me. And my brother had a huge impact on me. I really looked at him as somebody who had, more than anything, he had great music. So he used to fix up VWs, Volkswagen. And he had a whole stereo system set up in our garage. And so at night I would go out and do my homework in the garage while he was fixing cars. And he'd be talking to himself about he couldn't figure out how to do something. He's reading manuals, all of these things. And more than anything, I think I learned, this idea of if how much money you put into something, you've got to have margin. He would explain all these things to me, never really thinking that, if he bought a VW for 1,500, then he was constantly saying, okay, I've got to figure out if I put a stereo in, I'm going to be able to get a few $100 more because everybody wants a VW with a stereo in it. And so all of these things, that these lessons along the way, I think were great training. When I finally got to the point where I was in high school, I think everybody was surprised that I was able to go and get a job because I was only 14. I'll never forget not really my first job, because I guess I was babysitting a little bit before that and had started a camp with a friend of mine, but as well out of my house for kids, but ended up getting a job at a toy store. And I thought I was just going to work the cash register on Sundays and in Old Town Scottsdale, but it ended up that she felt like I really understood what kids wanted. Of course, I was a kid.
Sure.
So I ended up buying the toys for the store. And I went to the, toy fair, and I remember coming home and sharing this with my parents and my brother and talking about margins and it was, amazing, because when I was finally starting to take classes, economics classes and different, I just got it. It was real life experience. And, plus I was able to get toys at the store.
Yeah. I mean, the perks were there, perks were an early thing. That's right.
Yeah, but it was fun. I mean, it was fun, but little did I know that a lot of those kind of hands-on experiences, also dealing with consumers and asking questions of consumers and not being afraid to ask questions. And I think that's something today that drives every great marketer is having a connection to consumers and really understanding like what are your goals. And I think in every industry, frankly, that if you don't have that connection with the consumer, then you're pretty lost.
No, I agreed, and being able to know it and being able to learn it early on to see how it affects and what it does throughout a business, I think is very, very valuable. There were there are three things I definitely wanted to ask you. Two situations. The first off is there's a point in the book where you're talking about your co-packer comes back and says, and it's kind of this hostage situation of this is what you're gonna do, and nobody that starts their own business starts it out thinking, I love being told what I'm going to do, so I should start my own business. But how did that's a tough spot. I mean, you're in a pretty precarious situation and made an amazing and to me, I think it's a very brave decision. So this co-packer is saying, look, do this or else. Find it, buy, not even find it, but buy our equipment. And this is somebody that kind of you worked with a lot at that point, and it's that was tricky. I mean, I got to think that was not maybe it was an instant reaction and it was the right one, or was it one of these things where you're just like, man, I don't know. That's a tough spot, being held hostage with your, literally your baby in your arms, not the baby, but it was really interesting. You can kind of talk about how that feelings went.
Well, there were a few different co-packer situations. I mean, the first one that I encountered early on was that there was a way of doing business, and I think coming from tech, where you never heard people say the phrase "it can't be done," it just it just never was said. So here I was in Silicon Valley, and I still believe that today, people are very careful about saying it can't be done. They're saying it's not being done today,
Right.
which is different.
It's different.
Right? It's a very, very different thing. And so walking into the beverage industry, everybody immediately, I felt around me was not only they had rules, they had a way of doing business, and I didn't come from the industry. So I was, again, kind of growing up in the house that I grew up in, but also growing up in tech. I was asking why constantly. Like, why do you think that is? Because I was curious. And the co-packers, I guess, just didn't hear that very often. They expected to be working with people who had been, from Coke or Pepsi, had some sort of experience. But what I realized is that, many people hung up the phone initially, wouldn't meet with me because they sort of sized me up really quickly to think, what are the odds of her actually being able to launch a product? She doesn't have any experience. But there were a couple of them that said, gosh, I don't really know. I don't know why we do things the way that we're doing. I've been working here for 10 years and I just do it this way. And I just thought, wow, that's really interesting. Would you be willing to try? And again, not everybody was willing to try, but a few people were like, sure, if you can help me figure out how to produce a product that doesn't have preservatives in it, I'm game. Just tell me. We can't do it during certain hours. If you come at 11 o'clock at night, I'm open to doing it. And again, like that is, I was on their time because I didn't feel like I had, that experience. But I think in terms of, the story in particular that you're talking about, I mean, it was a crazy time for everybody. 2007, 2008, yeah. Right? It was like, the financial crisis. And, I think part of what sort of sets people apart from people who were able to weather the storm during the pandemic, very different crisis situation. But it was, you really had to figure out like, what can you do? And kind of throw everything, every model out the door that you had been working on. And instead, kind of go into a triage situation, literally with COVID. I mean, in some cases, into a triage situation for employees. But I feel like there was also the sense in 2007, 2008, where you've got to save yourself. So that's what the co-packers were really, trying to do. And customers were too. We had major retailers who were saying to us, like, just give us product and then, we'll put it on the shelf, but we need to make money because we're really hurting. We could go out of business. And so I think there's many lessons from that. First of all, I think you've got to have enough capital money in the bank to sort of weather storms that are unforeseen, because they will turn up, but also have enough other customers. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so that, once you really start to care about somebody's, decision that is not going to benefit you, then that's something that I always say to entrepreneurs. It's, that's the biggest issue that most people have, is that they think when business is going great, they've got one supplier and, they've got one customer, and then they don't, because they're looking out for themselves. They're not really looking out for you. And I think it's an important, lesson learned along the way. But I think finally, the last thing is that sometimes, you just have to say no, and you have to know your walk away too, because I think that that if you don't know what your walk away is, we could have lost that business in particular, but we didn't, because we basically, sort of went to the mat with them and said, we're not going to do that.
And sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes you're just being tested, and sometimes they're making to see if you'll go with it, and then to see how committed you are to what you're doing too. So I think that's important. So the main thing, and then this one's more self-serving, I'll admit it, because I have two daughters. So what do you tell young women now? It's kind of, I mean, they're my daughters, and I get that. But it's like, what do I know about being a woman in business? Very little, it turns out. So it's, so is it different? What is it about it that makes it, is it even an advantage sometimes? Is it, what do you tell when you speak on college campuses, particularly to young women now, about where they're headed and what they're doing?
So I think there's a few things. I think it's, I just had actually a guest on my podcast. I have a podcast called the Kara Goldin Show, and I was talking to Julia Borstein, who's on CNBC, and she just wrote a book on various female entrepreneurs. And one of the things that she was saying was that venture capital used to be 3% of venture capital went to women. It's now gone down to 2%. So it is, that is not a great stat. On the other hand, there's a lot of different opportunities to actually get capital. There's a lot of angel investors that are out there. You just have to find them, and you have to be able to network, which I think, is so key. You just have to be able to, try and figure out who has connections with who. Another one of my friends wrote a book called Your Network is Your Net Worth, Porter Gale. And I think it's 100% true. I mean, it is something that is absolutely critical for people to figure out, how do you network with different people along the way too. But it's tough. But on the other hand, if you focus on what you can't do, and you focus on those stats, then you're not going to be able to achieve what you want to achieve, right? If you need to go out and raise money, the odds are low that you're going to be able to raise it from venture capital until you really get a significant business. But if you want to achieve what you want to achieve, then you have to figure out how else did other people do it. And I think also focus on, not just your industry too. I've learned a lot, especially when I get stuck. I end up looking at people in different industries, and sort of other entrepreneurs and how they've done things. And so there's so many ways to, find out information about, people's journey, whether it's a podcast or whether it's books or, online storytelling, just reaching out to people and finding out, sort of if you have a specific question on how they did something, you'd be amazed at how many people will answer, off of LinkedIn, right? And not everybody, but it's definitely a place that I think, a lot of people can get stuff done. But again, I think it's you have to want to achieve things, right? And I always say actually to my kids who are like low end of millennial and also Gen Zers that, your ability to stand out, especially during times when people are, opting out of the workforce, as many people are today, or, there's a lot more virtual jobs today where people are, maybe getting virtual fatigue. They, don't want to do, a virtual job, or they do, or whatever it is. Your ability to actually just be fresh, show up and just do something, doesn't matter what your gender is, if you can actually be eager. People also, I think, believe that, or they really like to share stories, right? And so if, for example, somebody wants to work in your industry and they dig up something on you and how you've really inspired them to kind of get into this industry, you naturally are really eager to, help somebody because they've actually done their homework. And versus being in a position where I think a lot of managers feel like they're selling on a job, or they're just putting people into they're just putting a warm body into a spot to do a task. I think passion and commitment is something that is just not seen as much. And so that's a way for anybody to stand out. And I think, any executive that I know would be proud to hire somebody who has done their homework and, they reached out to them through LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is. And then they just, that's how they got there.
The 2% number is it because 98% of the people asking for money are men and it's that few women asking, or is it really people are more reluctant to invest in women?
It's interesting. I think that we raised a lot of money mostly through a family office and then a lot of individuals. And coming from tech, I really knew a lot of angels that had been investing in tech companies. But it's funny, we ended up getting into Google early on, and we're selling lots of Hint. Still have we sell Hint to Google and they give it away, but then people would leave Google and they go to Facebook and some of the other tech companies, and so we sort of became kind of a staple inside of tech companies. And so we started getting tech companies reaching out to me saying, "Hey, do you guys take angel investors?" And so I started thinking, well, if I get 10 of those, then that's kind of the same as, going around in venture. And you also set the price of it. You set the, there's not forward seats, all of that kind of stuff along the way. So I feel like I think a lot of people don't figure those, especially outside of the coast, maybe where they don't have that network. they're not sort of knowing where the angels are. And I think that they are much more based on the coast, but I think that's changed also. I think that the other piece of it is that there are a lot of angel networks for early, like seed money and I think where entrepreneurs really, not just women, but also men have a huge problem is when you get to that point, depending on your industry, where you want to raise B and C in order to scale. There, there's not the options. So you've got a strategic or a private equity or venture, maybe a family office, but it's very, very rare even that the angels would come in sort of a later stage to date. And I think that while there are female angel investors and even groups that are out there, they don't. I think it's a huge missed opportunity for people, because that's not where you've got different options that many entrepreneurs use along the way, like debt, but they also want to see that it's matched by some other kind of capital, and it's not just debt. So anyway, trying to simplify that as much as possible if people don't really understand all of that fundraising stuff, but it's but I think that that's really what it boils down to. And sorry for going on and on, but I think there's one other piece. I think that if a woman is launching a company like Sarah Blakely with Spanx, I mean, she's talked about going to venture capital companies and talking about pantyhose, and the number of men who are sitting around the table, they're just not interested in pantyhose, right? They've never thought about it. They don't really, right? They've probably very few of them have worn them. I mean, like all of those aspects. So the chances of them actually investing are low because people invest in
what you know.
in what you know, right? And the same with me when we went to venture capitalists early on, and it ends up that there are men who drink Diet Coke, but there are many more women. In fact, the target for diet drinks is women. And so it's I would go into a room filled with venture capitalists, and they knew, maybe some of them knew me from tech, but there was no tech angle at the time. We didn't have a direct to consumer business. So they weren't investing because they didn't understand the business. And so, that's another piece that I share with entrepreneurs too, that, sometimes you can think, oh, well, they're not investing because of my gender, or, they may not be investing because your product or your service is something that they just don't have any knowledge, any affiliation to, any, curiosity about, all of those things.
Yeah, it's like, it could be great. It's just not for me or something like that. It is funny that you mentioned Diet Coke. I think we were riding in our car and I was drinking a Diet Coke when you brought that into your book. And my wife's like, see?
I love it. I love it.
I guess we were hitting Wawa after that and picking up some hints. So it was great. Well, I really appreciate you spending the time with it. And it's a great book. It's Undaunted. And then, of course, your podcast, The Kara Goldin Show. That's fantastic. I really appreciate you spending time with me and kind of talking about it. And now I can go tell my daughter that she can listen to this and tell me whether or not I messed it up or not.
I love it. Well, thank you again. And thanks, everybody. Definitely, I'm all over social at Kara Goldin. And hopefully I'll hear from you. And like you were saying, the Kara Goldin Show, I interview a lot of entrepreneurs, founders of companies, many of them or have heard of. And Undaunted is hopefully you'll get a few laughs out of it. You'll see that building a company is not a straight line at all, or building a career is not a straight line. So, but thank you.
No. And I hope you still have the cappuccino machine. That's one of my favorites. Your husband in there, 3 in the morning.
We do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, our water was launched by a coffee machine. That's fantastic. Well, kudos to him, and kudos to him. That's awesome too. But thank you, and hopefully we'll connect again soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Get the Intel. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.